94.7 KUMU 803 on the Rise and No Drive, and we're happy to welcome into the show this morning as part of our KUMU Kokua. I don't know, it's our way to try and get you informed, keep you informed, and keep things calm. So people aren't freaking out and buying all the toilet paper.
I know, but this series, the KUMU Kokua series, if I might add, is kind of our station's way of helping solve people's problems and concerns. We are bringing in the biggest experts that we can contact to solve your issues.
And so today we're bringing Congressman Ed Case.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, aloha. Thanks for having me on.
You just had a big vote this past week, and I know a lot of people are actually kind of. I think some people are, all they think of is, I'm going to get money from the U.S. government, which is a little bit of a misnomer. So
well, in all honesty, that's what we need to do right now. The United States government, your government, needs to step in and try to cover the gaps where we're going through an incredible public health crisis and an economic crisis, and it's going to get worse. I think we all know that at this point, and we need to ride this through as best we possibly can with as least damage as we can. And that's when government has to step in and help out. And that's exactly what we did late last week. We passed a $2.2 trillion emergency assistance bill, largest in the history of our country. Now, that's a lot of money, but to put it in perspective, in any 1 year, our U.S. government spends $1.4 trillion on all discretionary, what we call discretionary spending, which is all spending other than for stuff that just is automatic, like Social Security. So for all defense, all education, all environmental protection, all of it is $1.4 trillion every single year for the United States government. Wow. We just spent $2.2 trillion. That's how seriously we take this issue from a public health perspective. As well as an economic. And, economy is just a word, right? What we're talking about is jobs. What we're talking about is cash flow. What we're talking about is people getting from paycheck to paycheck, people being helped when they don't have paychecks, people being able to work when they can and in different ways. Our medical providers who are absolutely on the front lines of this, being able to get the equipment that they need. This is the time when your government has to step forward. And that's what we've done. This is the third bill that we passed in the month of March. All of them emergencies. They're not going to be enough. We're going to have to go back and do further bills. But what we're trying to do right now, I guess what you can think about this in maybe three stages. One stage is survival, one stage is stability, and one stage is recovery. And you want to think about what we're going to be going through here in the next months and probably years. Is right now it's survival. It's getting through the worst of this pandemic. The next. We hope that the worst is the next weeks rather than months. If we all do our part, it could be the next weeks and not months and months and months. If we don't. I think every evidence is that it could get far worse for a lot longer period of time. But during that period, we've got to make sure that the public health institutions of our country are strong, that people got what they need to combat this, and that people with real jobs, real salaries, real needs, real rent payments, real mortgages, get the help that they cannot get anywhere else. And that's what we're trying to do in this particular bill.
Yeah. We have definitely been covering, in our news coverage, we have been doing the highlights. Can you guys can you walk people through kind of like what they can expect, like how this latest bill will impact them?
Well, let's start with what we're trying to accomplish in this bill. Now, we're trying to accomplish the medical providers, the vaccines, the test kits, the personal protective equipment for our medical providers, and that's all a major part of this bill, hundreds of billions of dollars. Let me focus now on the economic side of this. How do we get people through just from a financial perspective? How do we keep families going? How do we keep communities going? How do we keep nonprofits, serving people with incredible needs? And so what we're really trying to do here is to try to keep as many people in our country on payroll, whether they're actually going to work or not, whether they're actually able to do any work or not, but at least having some kind of a stable paycheck. We're trying to keep those folks on the job. And when people cannot get stay on the job or at least full time on the job, we want to make sure that unemployment benefits are strong enough to tide them through on an accelerated, increased supplemental basis. And then finally, what we're trying to do is to get immediate money into the pockets of especially those Americans with the most needs. So that kind of comes in a couple of buckets. One bucket is about $500 billion to the businesses of our country employing the workers. And this is not just a handout to the businesses. This is, here, we're going to help you out. But what we're doing with this money is you got to stay on the job and you got to keep paying your employees. Now, some of those businesses, such as airlines, is the best example. They can't, right? I mean, they're not flying. So obviously, we're not telling them keep flying is at the same volume. But we are saying, if we're going to be giving you this money, then you got to be helping your employees. Even if your employees are not going to work, you got to keep them on the payroll. So that's a huge chunk of this.
Okay.
Another huge chunk of this is small businesses. Small businesses are absolutely critical to us here in Hawaii. We've got one of the highest percentages of small businesses in the entire country. 96, 97, 98% of all of our businesses are small businesses.
Right.
Now, small businesses is defined as less than 500 employees. Well, okay, that's a pretty big business. But in Hawaii, we're really talking about the small businesses, 10 people, 5 people, sole proprietorships. And these folks need extra help. They tend to, they have a much, they live a little bit more on the margin.
Yes.
If they lose their cash flow, they're in trouble really fast. Restaurants are a perfect example. Food shops, these kind of areas that have been especially impacted. We're trying to get that help to them right away. The third area we're trying to get help to is the unemployment benefits that I talked about. And what we're trying to do there is say, hey, state, you've got a good foundation of unemployment benefits, but we want to supplement these by an extra $600 per payment per week, and we're also trying to lengthen the period of unemployment to about 39 weeks, so tide people over until hopefully the economy stabilizes and starts to recover. And then the final area that gets back to Devon's question is direct payments, what we call rebates, because technically they're considered rebates of tax payments, but you don't have to have paid your taxes to get them, so let's stop calling them rebates. They are payments to Americans in particular need, one-time cash payments to just help you out with that next, payment for your food, help you out with that next payment for your rent, whatever it might be. So those are the three big buckets, and I'm happy to get into any of those details.
Okay. Yeah, our KUMU listeners are already posting some questions about how to do some of these things. Do we want to take questions right now?
Go for it.
Okay. One of our KUMU listeners is asking and says thank you for all of those things that Congress is showing in terms of aid. Sharon says, can you ask the Congressman what happened to the forgiveness of student loans up to $10,000 that was reported in the initial release of the bill?
There is some relief in terms of forbearance, at least on those student loans.
Okay.
So in other words, there is not a nationwide forgiveness of all student debt. That is not in the bill. It may be in our future bills. Obviously, student debt is a huge burden to many people across the country. But where people do face crushing debt-related concerns from student debt or from mortgages or from rent.
Yes.
What we're saying here is, hey, we're gonna take a break from your requirement to pay for now, and we'll just simply figure the rest of it out later on. So again, I want people to think about this as in phases. This is not trying to solve every single problem for the next 2 years. We've got plenty of issues that we're going to have to walk through. What we're trying to get through is that survival mode of really 4 to 8 weeks, 4 to 8 to 12 weeks to get us through the worst of the public health emergency, or what we hope, again, will be the worst of the public health emergency. The figures that you cited from the White House earlier are very stark and grim, and those figures also indicate a potential peak for the United States of about the middle of this month. So that's the course, and then hopefully that peak, we top over that peak and start to go down if in fact we do practice social distancing and curb the spread of the virus. Here in Hawaii, those same statistics say that our peak is about 2 weeks later. So we're talking about the end of this month, and how bad that peak is going to be depends on all of us. And so we're talking really about this period of 4 to 8 weeks when we completely have to all practice that social distancing, which per se disrupts an economy to a major area. We've got claims have gone up about 20%
Yes.
over about 5 weeks ago in our state. We're estimating unemployment in a couple of months in Hawaii of 25%. So these are dire times when we need to tide those people through. So what I'm trying to say, to go back to the student debt question, is, look, we're just going to kind of halt these things for now, and then Congress is going to have to go back, as will individual states, to say, well, what are we actually going to do about this debt now? Because obviously, if you just defer your debt for a few months, you still have it.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Thank you
Makes
very
sense.
much. Once again, we're here with Congressman Ed Case. If you do have questions for him, please post it on our Facebook. You can post it on his Facebook if you're watching it that way, because we do have it up on Facebook Live. You can give us a call, 947-5868. You can email. There's so many different ways to contact us. Just
Fastest way to do it, though, at least for KUMU, for our feed, is get on our KUMU Facebook, because I am monitoring that particular thread right now. So as the questions are being posted, I can turn them over to the congressman.
So we'll get to more of your questions, and we'll talk more with Congressman Ed Case coming up right here on KUMU Kokua, 94.7 KUMU.
With 94.7 KUMU, the Rise and Drive Morning Show. Hey, how's it, Devon?
And Esme from the Rise and Drive.
We know that many of you are anxious because of what's been happening with COVID-19.
We certainly
Yes.
share your
You need water.
concerns.
I'm good.
We
Thank
also
you.
know there are some steps that you can take to make sure that we lessen the impact of this for you and your ohana.
First, wash your hands. 20 seconds under warm soapy water is best.
Wash my hands. Okay, I'm washing my hands right
There you
now.
go.
And then avoid touching your face.
Second, continue to do social distancing. That means keep it at 6
I can't remember on that bill. Did they eventually do voice vote, or did you have to fly up to that?
Voice vote.
They did do. Oh, thank goodness! Wow.
Yeah. Man, I was.
Because you would not be here right
I
now.
was.
Yeah.
No, I would either be back there or I would be here in quarantine.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So.
Are they not making an exception for you in that 14-day?
Well, I actually didn't know it when I was trying to figure out whether I needed to go or not.
Yeah.
It does turn out that that General Har's order does exempt. But I mean, in a way, okay, fine, he exempted us. But on the other hand, we have the same health risk as everybody else. I don't have some magic health risk. So, that was quite tense. So,
Yeah.
and the one guy, the one member of Congress.
We'll be nice about, since we're still on Facebook Live.
Yeah.
But he was getting ready to cause issues. So I was a little worried. I know my auntie was probably plenty worried.
Hi, sweetie. My wife just texted me and said, "I can see you. I can see you." So now I'm embarrassing her by
Yes, there you go.
saying hi in front of everybody.
I'll say hi to my auntie too.
Analysis at 670-1600. Now with 3 convenient
Just
locations.
FYI, you can kind of think about this while we're waiting to come back on the air. Some of the other questions that our listeners have posed, somebody is asking about kupuna who haven't earned income and
Yeah.
don't pay taxes, and are they
Right.
going to get checks? And along those lines also about homeless people, how they're going to get their money.
Okay.
And then somebody's also asking, what is of course, we heard the numbers from President Trump, and he just extended to April 30th the stay-at-home guidelines. But is the feeling on Capitol Hill that it's going to get extended again?
The what?
The
tax?
stay-at-home the stay-at-home
Oh.
guidelines.
Yeah. Got it.
Those are some of the
Okay.
questions. that
I've got a few myself,
okay.
so I'm going to read out a few.
Cool.
I'm going to talk about the direct payments a little bit when
Please do.
if that's okay.
When we come back, I'll just throw it to you. And then
Okay.
You can, yeah. Try and put
And like how, what people are supposed to do, probably nothing, right? Most people, nothing. Yeah. they'll just come.
So my entire staff, thank you very much to my staff right now. My entire staff is reminding me that even though we're on commercial
Stop
break,
touching your- Yeah.
I'm still live.
That's what I keep
Yes.
saying too.
I know
Yeah,
that.
We are with.
Nestor over there just cringing. Hi, Nestor.
It's okay. We're okay.
.818 on the Rise and Drive. We are here live with Congressman Ed Case, and he's actually doing a Facebook Live as we're doing our Facebook Live, and he's gotten some questions from his constituents as well. So
Sure, and I want to encourage all the folks out there to post your questions right now or email them into ed.case@mail.house.gov, ed.case@mail.house.gov. My staff is getting your questions to me. I want to go back to really the resources. I talked about the four buckets, the assistance to businesses, assistance to small businesses, assistance in terms of direct payments, and assistance in terms of enhanced unemployment benefits. And the first thing I want to say is that I have put a ton of information on my website at case.house.gov.
I'm looking at it right now.
Case.house.gov. I've tried every time I get a question, I try to get it answered on that website. We've got a bunch of information on there. Hopefully, it's easy to use. There's a, for example, a frequently asked question from the Internal Revenue Service on the direct payments that I think is really useful. There is a whole bunch of stuff in terms of loans and grants to small businesses. There's information on the unemployment insurance and also on the $2.2 trillion stimulus bill overall. So, look. This is a time when you need your congressional office for a couple of areas. First of all, my responsibility obviously has been to contribute to national leadership on behalf of our country, to try to make the right decisions to steer us through. The $2.2 trillion bill was one of those. The second part of my responsibilities is to make sure Hawaii is taken care of, Hawaii resources, Hawaii needs, Hawaii specific. Sometimes we don't operate like the rest of the country. And then I think really one of the most important parts of my job is to get information to people because they have so many questions. Just this morning we've seen so many questions already. And if questions are not answered, then that leads to uncertainty. Uncertainty leads to fear. Fear leads to a lot of confusion. And my goal is to avoid that. What I can do here is to say, look, this is the path we're on. This is how we need to stay on that path. These are the resources. This is the information. This is how you get this assistance. This is when you're going to get it. This is so you can plan within your own, your own family, your own communities, so you know what's going on. And I think that's a really critical role of government in tough times like this. So that's what this is all about, case.house.gov. So I'm going to take a couple of questions that I've got, if that's okay. So here's one. Thank you for keeping us up to date and what's happening in government. I was curious, though, my sister-in-law and her family are missionaries overseas but pay their taxes every year. They used to live in your district here in Honolulu, still call Honolulu home. They're planning to come back home to Hawaii soon to weather out the coronavirus storm. By the way, 14-day quarantine if you do that. Please don't break that. They make less than the maximum amount per married couple. Will they still be eligible for the stimulus check? So let me lay out this direct payment a little bit. The idea here is that the U.S. government will pay $1,200 to individuals, $2,400 to families, people filing jointly, $500 per child, dependent child under 17, at certain income levels. So the maximum will go to you if your income is $75,000 individual, $150,000 joint, and then it phases down until about $100,000 individual. $200,000 joint, you will not get those checks. Now, so I don't want anybody to be surprised that they're making over $200,000, they don't get a check. Clearly, what we're trying to do here is to get this money into the hands of the folks that make less and probably do not have the same resources that folks above those levels have. So this does not go to all Americans. First of all, it does go to most Americans because most Americans don't make more than those amounts. Number one. Number two, how do you get your checks? So if you filed tax returns 2019, 2018, it's going to be pretty automatic because this goes off whether you filed your tax returns. And the people that are probably going to get it fastest are the folks that have filed electronically, have paid electronically, that have a bank account, and have that relationship with the IRS. So frankly, you don't have to do anything. The IRS is going to pay you at some point in the next couple of weeks. Now, there's some folks out there, and I think one of your questions was along these lines. The question was from a kupuna who does not pay taxes right now. Yes, you are going to get a check as long as you're under those income levels. It's the IRS has not said yet exactly how they're going to get that money to folks, but it'll probably be through social security numbers, because that's one of the key determinants here is do you have a social security number? And so for that senior, we're going to try to get the information to them as soon as the IRS tells us. To my question from my constituent, the answer then to your question is, as long as your relatives are U.S. citizens, have a social security number, have been paying their taxes, yes, they are eligible if they're under those income levels.
Okay. If I can ask a follow-up question on those individual checks that'll be coming to taxpayers. So again, $1,200 for individuals, $2,400 for couples. The question from one of our listeners, Ohia, said, will people get those checks faster? Well, she was asking about the electronic filing, but she said, okay, so the deadline for filing taxes for 2019 has been extended, right, till July. Do you have to have filed your 2019 tax return in order to get a check? Because a lot of people are going to be observing now the longer deadline.
Well, first of all, just to go back to what I said earlier, you don't have to have filed a tax return in order to be eligible for the check. There just may be a different way to get you that payment, and we don't know what the details of that are, but we do know that if you file a tax return in 18 or 19, then that's going to be a pretty automatic at that point.
Okay, that helps. Okay. Let's see. Another question is from our friend Angie, who is also a KUMU listener. She is asking, with more than 120,000 people here in Hawaii filing for unemployment. She is asking whether you were talking earlier about the enhanced unemployment federal benefits, right? For unemployed people, do you have to do a separate filing? Is what she's asking, or is that when you do this, when you file with the state, will you automatically also get a federal?
No,
support?
all unemployment benefits are still running through the state.
Okay.
It's just that what the feds are doing is supplementing what the state has and doing really a pass-through through the state unemployment system. So that should be pretty automatic. Now, let's all acknowledge that with unemployment claims spiraling and continuing to spiral, our state unemployment office has been overwhelmed.
Yes.
I think I forget what the figures are, but I'm going to try to get this right because I heard it just the other day. I want to say that 8 weeks ago, six to 8 weeks ago, we had 400 claims in the week, and in the last week we had 30,000, somewhere around that range.
We were at I think 2.7 unemployment, and now we're like approaching 20,
exactly.
20, 30.
And also 6 to 8 weeks ago, there were 7 people in the state unemployment insurance office processing claims. Today that has tripled, quadrupled. Credit to the State Department of Labor and to the governor to trying to ramp that up. But they've had to ramp up from virtually zero in a very, very short period of time. So that system has crashed. And people have had trouble getting in to make their claims. The best advice from the governor and the director of labor is keep trying. They have materially increased their computer capacity, and they have materially increased the number of folks that are processing claims, and they're trying to accelerate those claims as fast as possible. So you just got to keep trying to get those claims processed.
Got a question off our Facebook from James Kwan, which is the status of RIMPAC. If it goes forward, what measures can be put in place to minimize seal COVID-19 exposure?
Well, but so far the military has said that they're going to run a completely scaled back version of RIMPAC, that would, for example, involve not a whole bunch of ship-to-shore contact, because RIMPAC is an exercise out in the ocean, so folks don't have to call in at the port. That's one way. Now, I frankly think it's anybody's guess whether it's actually going to go off. Already a number of countries have basically opted out and said, well, fine, we're not going to do that. Now, I think we're in a difficult situation here because this is a crisis. Our military still has to be ready. Our military still has to provide for the national defense. So we can't just shut our military down. We cannot just shut training down. We cannot just shut readiness down. We've got to keep troops deployed. There's bad people out there in the world that would be perfectly happy to take advantage of this time. I think that would be stupid of them, but can't put it past them. And so I have trusted our military to make the right decisions to protect the health and welfare. After all, let's face it, our military has every single incentive to make sure that this pandemic does not spread through members of the military and their families and the civilian community.
Sure.
And they also have, frankly, some pretty unique resources that are not as readily available in the civilian, like the ability to order people to do stuff, and under penalty of court-martial. So.
Right.
So what's going to happen to RIMPAC, I don't really know. I know that they are scaling it down at least now and trying to minimize every single risk that it would present. I got one here. Thanks for the update. My question is for small businesses. Are there any current grants for them other than applying for loans? Loans have to be paid back and add a lot of debt to small businesses, and there are still questions about taxes. Usually IRS considers monies received as taxable, thus adding more burden. Can you please clarify? Okay, so first of all, there's a bunch of assistance to small businesses. There are what we call economic injury disaster loans that are available now. You can get to my website. Those are loans that can go out, and they can be converted into grants. So it is under certain circumstances, a loan will just turn into a loan being forborne, forgiven, and it'll turn into a direct grant.
But they have to follow specific guidelines.
They have to follow the specific guidelines, and my office can help any small businesses out there. Let me say here that when we're talking small business, again, we're not always talking about kind of the traditional business where you got whatever shop and 10 employees. We're talking about sole proprietors. We're talking about independent contractors. We're also talking about nonprofits. So these are gig economy workers. They can work out of your house. If you have some established, business conduct, you are eligible for these loans. Now we have other loans called Paycheck Protection loans that we're about to roll out. Those came out of the $2.2 trillion bill, and these are about $350 billion worth of loans.
Okay.
The deal is this: you get the loan, you got to use that money to keep your employees on the payroll, or if you already let them go, you got to hire them back. And if you keep them on the payroll and hire them back, and keep them on the payroll for a certain period of time, that loan is forgiven.
Oh wow!
Right. Yeah.
So that's a really
Cool.
good deal.
Yeah.
Now my challenge is to get it rolled out as fast as possible, because a lot of our small businesses, they're on the brink right now if they're not already over the edge. So that weighs on my mind all of the time is the folks that are just right on the edge from a financial perspective and a business perspective. So
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's there are so many new initiatives via this bill that are available. So if people are confused about which of these apply to them, they can call your office. Your staff can help sort that out.
absolutely, that's what my staff is on the job full time. We're all teleworking for the most part, but it's all hands on deck. It's an emergency. I think my office and I and the delegation, understand the urgency. We understand the critical importance of the delegation to help folks in Hawaii. We understand that our job is to get information to people and get people, hooked up with the resources out there, and to cut through the bureaucracy. A lot of this stuff is pretty bureaucratic, and in all honesty, in some cases, we've never done some of this before.
Yeah.
For example, we have never extended small business loans to nonprofits. So we have to create this entire new, set of procedures on, well, how do we do that? And we have to do it inside about a week. We just passed it. We just passed this bill, 5 days ago. So there's a lot of scrambling going on, and I'm sure that I am not unlike any other member of Congress, my colleagues, and in helping the federal government to scramble to get this done.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that's one of the things that people are, I don't know, sometimes maybe they're not processing quite as well, is that we're talking 50 states, well, and our territories and stuff. I mean, all of these people are all being affected at the same time. It's not a thing of where it's only happening to Hawaii. It's happening everywhere and nationwide. So it's put us into I don't know, almost a lockup of trying to get
Yeah, this
stuff
is
out because it's unusual. It's not like us going, oh, there was a hurricane in Hawaii and we need to help with something, right? It's
Exactly.
like it's everybody. It's all at once.
Yeah, I mean, and let's not forget the other jurisdictions. We have 55, jurisdictions throughout our country that have COVID-19 one way, shape, or form. So all 50 states plus, let's see, almost all of the territories and other parts of our country. So it's widespread, and you're right. That creates a particular challenge because it's not a hurricane in Louisiana or an earthquake in California or a tsunami in Hawaii for that matter.
Right.
It's been on my mind because April 1st.
I know.
1946. If you remember your tsunami history, this was the worst tsunami that we suffered on April 1st. Every April 1st, I wake up and I do two things: April Fool's, tsunami.
So you can tell he's a big item.
Right, I know, right?
We had a question from Lynn Reyes. If you owe taxes for 2019, do you still get a stimulus check? My assumption.
Well, that's an
Yes.
interesting question.
Yes. This does not.
It's irrespective of the taxes.
This does not depend on whether you paid taxes, get a tax refund, or anything else. It is a pretty unconditional payment to Americans to help them through. And by the way, that gets to a question that I have here. How is the rebate amount chosen? Shouldn't lower income earners receive a larger check than those still with jobs? First of all, lower income earners do receive a larger check because it up to the $75,000 per year individual, $150,000 per year joint. You get the max checks, and then it reduces after that. The check amounts reduce after that again until $100,000, $200,000, at which point there's no payment. So this is graduated. This is intended again to get to the folks that need it the most. And then as to the do you have a job or not? That was a debate. How do we? Here's the deal. With these checks, we wanted to get money into people's hands immediately. And every time you add a condition, like you say, well, prove whether you have a job or not. And if you don't have a job, then you get more. And if you have a job, you do. That slows the entire process down. So what we were trying to do, and rightly or wrongly, our policy judgment here was that although there were many arguments for making these payments at a different amount or in a different way or on a set of conditions, our judgment in Congress was these need to get into people's hands ASAP. And the result is going to be, in all honesty, that some people that really need a lot more are not going to get as much, and perhaps there's going to be people out there who get a check that don't need it. And if they don't need it, I would say, well, then please contribute it to a charitable cause because there's lots of needs out there. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and I think you can even deduct it on your taxes the next time around. So that's the answer on that.
Okay, and so what you're saying is that the priority there was rather than get bogged down in policy questions and qualifications, to just get the money out there, get the economy rolling.
Get it out. Get it out.
Yeah.
Try. We're in the survival stage, trying to get to a stability stage. How do you get through survival to some form of stability? How do you buy some time? How do you ride out the storm, the worst of the storm? Doesn't mean that at the end of the worst of the storm you don't still have a storm, but you got to get through the worst of it. And so, that's the goal here. And again, I would say this is not the end of this. Congress is already working on a fourth bill. We're already working now. I was on the phone with my colleagues. I've been on the phone with them repeatedly over the last number of weeks as we've all been home. We go on calls where there's like 200 members of Congress on a conference call.
Oh, wow.
And I've done about 10 of those calls at this point in really the last 5 or 6 days. I'm going to do another one actually right after this show. And so I hear what's happening in the rest of the country, and we're all facing the same basic challenges, and we all know that we're going to have to act again. So yesterday, our speaker and other members of Congress were on the phone saying, fourth bill being developed, get your ideas in right now to try to stimulate a little bit more of the economy.
Okay, you actually went ahead and answered, because that was going to be my next question. One of our listeners, Jill, in Makiki had said, will there be further checks? Because she said, this is going to help me for a month, but then what? So that's what you guys are talking about.
Okay, well, yes, that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to get through the next 4 to 8 weeks and figure out what more can we do. Now, to Jill, I would say, well, yes, there's a couple of options here. I think first of all, obviously the check will help you, and that's good, and I appreciate that it's not enough to help you for more than that long, especially in a high-cost state like Hawaii. There's certainly the option of unemployment benefits, if that's an option for you, and if you are employed or were employed, the entire focus of the stimulus package that we just passed was to keep people on the payroll. So I would go back to your employer and say, I've been telling a lot of folks this, because a lot of employers don't know what's coming. So they're making decisions on laying people off when they're going to get assistance in order to keep them on the payroll. If Jill was laid off, then she should go back and say, hey, you got money coming to you. Can you apply for it and rehire us? That's good for you, good for us. And certainly if she's on the job and on the edge in terms of her job, same basic message to her employer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you
Good
very much.
stuff. Yeah.
Once again, Congressman Ed Case joining us here in the studio for Kumu Kokua. He's taking your questions. He's on Facebook. We're on Facebook. You can also call us here at the studio, 947-5868. We're going to take a quick break. Be right back.
Experience UConn.
That's very helpful.
Service, atmosphere, and value. Now available for delivery and pickup.
Yeah.
I got a couple of questions. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. It's very helpful.
Try UConn access more. Magic of UConn. Visit online at u-coffee.com for more information on the restaurant.
Sorry.
That's okay. No problem.
Oh, you're fine. Takes a village to make the digital podcast happen.
We got another, I was listening to NPR on the way in, and they were talking about the Roosevelt. That's harbored at Guam right
Guam,
now, and they're
yeah.
trying to get these guys off the ship, and the captain is like, we need to get everybody off. It's like 200 to 400 people, but there's 4,000 people on that ship, and to try to put them all into Guam, it just sounds insane. So I'm wondering, like, what is the military trying to do with regards to that stuff? Because I mean, the base, I'm sure with the base you can spread people out, but I mean, even Kaneohe and
Well, they're sorting through that right now. I'm sure that's DoD's top priority right now. Is what are they doing about the Roosevelt in Guam? They do have a naval hospital there, which has capacity, but what they're really concerned about is they're definitely concerned about further exposure on the ship. But what they really have to do is they have to take everybody off and clean the ship.
Yeah.
And then the folks that are not sick, put them back on. So thus far they haven't let anybody be on the pier. So how do you do that? Take 4,000 sailors off a ship and put them on a pier for a few days while you clean the ship.
Yeah.
That's a logistical issue that they're facing.
And I can't even imagine trying to navigate that. I mean, no pun intended, but jeez. But I mean, I'm sure now, Kaneohe Marine Base must be thinking of something to do, and Schofields got to come. We have so much military here that I'm like, wow. And then I have a couple friends who have husbands who are in a sub. So somebody gets in on a sub, dude, it's over. There's no,
We're getting some interesting questions here.
Yeah, I'll probably have to take less time on some of the answers. I have about 4 or 5 here.
But you know what? It is, and thank you for being, detailed though, because I think it is shedding light on how people proceed from here. So that is helpful.
Going back to
That has to be one of the most iconic jingles that ever.
I know, right?
received.
Yeah, everybody knows it, man. As soon as it plays, I go, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, some interesting questions here.
take home with it, you know.
Traffic update is a lot easier nowadays.
That's amazing. It is to go, we're good.
They actually redirected Macy Denise on Hawaii News now in the mornings now. She doesn't do so much traffic reports anymore because there's no traffic to report.
(8:44) on the Rise and No Drive in our Kumu Kokua segment this morning. Very happy to welcome in Congressman Ed Case. We've been taking questions galore, so I'm gonna just step back and let you go.
Okay.
I feel like people will get mad at me. They're like, stop talking.
Well,
we
we
want to
do-
hear from the congressman.
Yes, and definitely he is. And by the way, if you are just tuning in, we are taking questions on our Kumu Facebook underneath the thread where the live video is showing. But also the congressman is getting questions through his office
So we're
and
trying
on
to get
his
to them all.
Facebook as
We're
well.
trying to
So
get to them
yeah,
all.
we'll get
So-
to as many as we
Okay,
can.
Congressman, go for it.
What will this bill do to the national debt? Well, this is a big issue for the national debt. Our national debt was $23 trillion before this pandemic, and we have committed about $2.5 trillion total so far, and that's not going to be the end of it. So this is clearly an issue for our national debt, and it does concern me, but we have to do it. We have to do it, and we could go back right now and consider why we didn't, kind of spend more wisely and create rainy day funds and that kind of stuff. We didn't. This is really not the time to talk about that. We've got to help our country. The national debt is going to be far worse if we don't stabilize and recover our economy. So,
Hey, going forward, how does this affect Congress? Because I was just curious about that. Because I mean, you're home, but sorry.
Well, we're
on a personal level. I know you. So I'm like, I don't want you going back over there.
Right. Well, we're sorting that through. We do not have in Congress remote voting. And there's a lot of good historical reasons. Some people argue there are constitutional requirements. I don't think so. But we have never instituted purely remote voting. And, the reasons are pretty straightforward. You want us to deliberate. You want us to debate. You want us to consider collaboratively. And so, in all honesty, I think we were caught a little flat-footed on this. And we are having very, very active discussions. It's kind of a catch-22. Because in order to change the rules on remote voting, we have to be there to vote
Exactly.
personally.
Yeah.
So, for example, the $2.2 trillion, and there's ways of us acting without everybody having to go back to Washington. For example, the $2.2 trillion bill last Friday was adopted by voice vote, so there was no recorded vote. So somebody stood up and said, I move that we spend $2.2 trillion. All those in favor say aye, aye. All those opposed, no. No, the ayes have it. That's it.
Yeah.
Now, one guy asked for a recorded vote,
Yeah.
which I thought was, under the circumstances, criminal because that forced people to think about whether they had to go, back. The bill was going to pass anyway, overwhelmingly pass the Senate. Nonetheless, Congress is having to think about how we operate in a national emergency. I think, in all honesty, Congress just never really thought through the idea that it would be a public health pandemic that would influence. It's one thing for us to be attacked, like 9/11. You could still go back to Congress and deliberate, but when it affects you in every single one of your districts, that's a different story. So we're having to figure that out right now.
Did you have another question that you wanted to answer?
What do you see as possible ways Congress can help nonprofit organizations? Well, the number one way we can help nonprofits is through the small business loans, which I talked about earlier. Small nonprofits are eligible for these small business loans. Well, there's more than one way, but number one, try out the small business loans. Nonprofits are eligible for them. Number one. Number two, much of that $2.2 trillion went to fund major programs on an emergency basis that are administered by the nonprofits, and the nonprofits can use those funds in part for administrative expenses. So, for example, emotional health and suicide prevention, huge increases in those programs because so many people are under stress. So nonprofits in that area can certainly take advantage of those funds from the federal government to operate.
Okay. That is good to know. One of our listeners, Lonnie, is asking, well, okay, so she is noting, of course, as you mentioned earlier, some of the forbearance that has been recommended regarding mortgages and rents and so forth. She is asking, should there be a freeze also on things like utilities and various other bills? She says, until this virus situation goes away, that way people don't worry about going to work to pay those bills, and then they're more likely to stay home. And I guess I would add to that, so the question is, will there be, some other people are asking also, will there be guidance from Congress on utilities, credit card bills, other kinds of bills, either some kind of forbearance or at least asking lenders and these holders of these, the creditors to maybe skip interest payments or some kind of relief there?
Well, we've definitely strongly suggested to people like creditors and utilities that this is not the appropriate time to be going in with strict enforcement mechanisms. And I will say that in my knowledge and experience, the large portion of them get that, understand that, and have voluntarily. Here in Hawaii, I think that has been the case as well. We have at least considered whether to just do a blanket forbearance on, for example, credit cards. But here's the other side of that argument. If I am able to pay my credit card bills, shouldn't I? Should that be blanket? Should every single person be able not to pay their bills? I mean, we have to maintain some level of economic function, of economic stability, if you forbear, then it's just harder to pay it back later. Now, having said that, I think that certainly that we've certainly taken some provisions along those lines in terms of, for example, mortgage and rental payments, where we have essentially said, hey, if these are federally backed mortgages, which a lot of the mortgages are out there, if these are federal housing programs or rental programs, which a lot of them are, you cannot take any actions to force people out of their homes or to foreclose on them for at least 180 days while we get through this period. So I think we're trying to find the right response to that. States are free, by the way, to take their own actions, and many states have. And again, a small community like Hawaii, if Hawaiian Electric is going to be hard about this, I think they get nailed, right? So I think they're being responsible, as are the banks.
Okay.
They're giving us the ability to pay electronically. Which is really
good.
nice. Thank
Very
you.
helpful.
I can pay my bill electronically. So, going forward, Congressman, what do you see happening with regards to, when Congress is able to sort of get this sorted out, figured out? I mean, what are some of the priorities that you think our own congressional party or team is saying going forward? Like, are we gonna, what else do we need to take care of? Are we still in this emergency thing where we need to just, stop the bleeding and then move forward?
Well, we can't take this from we can't kind of take this as a series of, defined steps, like we got to finish this step before we think about the next step. We have to think about everything right now. So in my mind, I'm thinking about every single one of those stages and planning for them and acting for them right now. I'm thinking, planning, and acting, and voting, and talking in Congress about survival for the next 48 weeks. I'm thinking, planning, and acting for stability. 8 to whatever. These are artificial numbers, but I hope they, indicate what I'm trying to say. And then I'm thinking, planning, and acting for recovery. So how do I get us through survival while we're planning for stability and that next large congressional bill and getting that money to Hawaii and then into recovery? So in my mind, the stability, the survival side of it is almost all about keeping people on the job, keeping paychecks going where we can, getting unemployment benefits, getting small businesses the assistance that's going to hold them through the worst of this, hopefully the worst of this. And then in my mind, the next stage is what we're already working on in Congress, which is how can we prime the economic pump? This is like like a New Deal. It's the functional equivalent. And what we did in the Great Depression through Roosevelt and the New Deal was the way we tried to get the economy to stabilize was we did federal spending on infrastructure. So that's when we, constructed some of our greatest things. The Workers Progress Administration and all of the great trails, for example. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in Hawaii. We don't even think about it anymore, but that came out of the Great Deal or the New Deal. And so in Congress, we're talking about a couple $1 trillion infrastructure spending package, which would go out there to help us with our roads, our harbors, our airports, our broadband, things that we all know are neglected here in Hawaii. So I'm directly focused on that. And then finally, in terms of the recovery and the stability and the recovery, I'm completely focused on the travel and tourism industry, which is our economic driver, and on the airlines and on the restaurants and on the hundreds of thousands of people out there that in one way, shape, or form are dependent on tourism. We're going to have to get that stood up and operating right away. Now, in the same kind of vein, I want to say one thing here, and that is that we've got really four pillars of our local economy. Number one is travel and tourism. Number two is the military. Number three is construction. Number four is agriculture. Travel and tourism has taken a huge hit. The military, let's talk about what our economy would be like right now if we didn't have a stable military here contributing to us. So let's reflect on the value of our military overall. When I hear people bash the military, I say, well, would you like them not to be here right now with their federal dollars circulating in our economy and the stability that they're providing to our economy? Construction, okay so far, because a lot of these projects are already in the works as long as people can safely go to work. But the pipeline beyond that is what we're worrying about, the new starts. And then agriculture has its issues as well, but it's still, we're all trying to, do, fresh produce distribution and buying and helping our local farmers. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at it.
Okay.
Our friend Zan
Yes.
also asked about that list of essential workers. She said that list is so long. Is there any way to shut that, to cut it down just a little bit? What's your take on that?
I'm not going to second guess the governor's decisions. He doesn't need me to be second guessing him. If we're all on a team.
Yeah.
Any team in a crisis, you got to beat a team. And the governor has his role, and I got my role. The mayor has his role. Our industry has their role, and so that's the governor's call. And if I have concerns about what the governor is doing, I'm in contact with him all the time. We text back and forth. We compare notes. My job is to make sure that the federal decisions are the right decisions. So I have not wanted to weigh in on the various decisions publicly, at least, because that's not what people want right now. They want their team to be unified and all pulling together.
Especially because our team is not the biggest team.
Well, we got 4 members of Congress and one governor and four mayors and a bunch of very good elected officials across the board, and we all do have to pull together for Hawaii.
Got to roll in the same direction.
Definitely.
Any other questions came into you?
Yeah, actually, I have a question from one of our listeners. Maribel is asking, how long do you predict people will have to quarantine at home? Now, I would add, we know that the White House extended the social distancing directions, extending it to April 30th. And so, on Capitol Hill, what is the feeling, and are you guys preparing for a longer social distancing direction from the White House?
Well, the answer is yes. We have to at least anticipate that that's a possibility.
Go beyond April 30th.
I wish I could say to everybody, hey, I got this word from on high, and we can end social distancing on April 15th and go back to our normal lives. And the fact of the matter is, the reality is that's not the case, and on high is not going to say that. So, every indication we have is that this virus traces a fairly predictable path that has a great variable built into it depending on whether people social distance. So when the president yesterday says that we project between 100,000 and 200,000 deaths, 100,000 is with moderate social distancing, and 200,000 is with more than that. And furthermore, that there would be a peak maybe somewhere around the middle to the latter part of this month in our country, and probably lagging 2 weeks behind in our state, because that's what the indications have been. So that's why it's so critical when the lieutenant governor says it's critical for us to do it. The governor says we've got to do this now, when we've got a quarantine between islands, when we've got a quarantine coming in. That is intended to shorten that period and keep that peak down so that we can get to a point where we can consider starting to loosen up. it's very, very difficult for me to have a crystal ball on this, but I think April 30th is an absolutely realistic deadline for now for us to say we've got to do it at least until then. Now, I think what's going to happen here is that we're going to come down to the end of this month and we're going to have to take a look at where we are. If we're still accelerating at the end of this month, we're going to have to stay in quarantine beyond the end of this month. If we're starting to level out and go down, then we can start to think about, well, what's a responsible way for us to start to try to engage a little bit more. But it is up to us, and we will not know the answers to these questions until the latter part of April. That's when we're going to have an indication as to whether either in Hawaii or our country, social distancing is going to have to continue.
So Dr. Fauci's been saying, right? He says we don't set the time frame.
Yeah, the virus sets the timeline.
Well,
Yeah.
in some ways we do set it because
social distancing, the better we
because
do
social
at it,
distancing
right?
and
Yeah.
those countries that have we've seen it around the world. Those countries that have gotten after social distancing right away, testing social distancing. South Korea, Singapore. They turned the corner faster, and those countries that didn't, Italy got completely caught flat-footed and didn't respond fast enough, and that led to Spain, our country, to a great extent, unfortunately.
In New York,
we were slow off the trigger.
Yeah.
That's inexcusable, but it's water under the bridge. We got to deal with the future now. So, what we do in the next couple of weeks is going to be really, really critical.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Well, we're right up against it. We have to let him go because he has to actually get on a phone call with 200 members of Congress. So, it's always something, Congressman Ed Case. So, Congressman, thank you so much for stopping by. Really appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge with us. Again, if you can go to his website, if you have more information, please feel free to go to
case.house.gov. Case.house.gov. Open invitation, open resources, and from there you can get to contacting my office by phone, by email, whatever works for you. And don't come into my office, please.
Because social distancing, people.
social distancing.
Yeah.
But the congressman has very graciously also, I'll just reiterate what he said earlier, that there are lots of parts to this whole stimulus package, and some of it can be a little confusing. So he said that his staff is willing to help you kind of sort it out and figure out what you need to do to get the aid that you need. So definitely reach out to him, and we'll post all that information on our KUMU Facebook.
Thank you very much. Anything you want to say in closing?
No, I just say, everybody, we're all in this together. Let's get through this together, and everybody be well.
Thank you.
There you go.